I never should have taken this damn road. I had been cruising in my brand new Mercedes, enjoying the smooth hum of the engine, when out of nowhere, thump, thump, thump. My stomach dropped. The car started pulling to the right, and before I even had time to curse, I knew exactly what had happened. Flat tire. I pulled over, killing the engine, and stepped out onto the deserted stretch of road. One glance confirmed it, rear tire, completely shot. The worst part? I was in the middle of nowhere. No houses, no signs of life, just endless trees and open sky. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and checked the screen. No signal. Of course. Just my luck. I let out a sharp breath, running a hand through my hair. I had a crucial business meeting in less than 2 hours, a deal that had taken months to put together. And now, here I was, stuck on the side of some godforsaken road with no help in sight. I popped the trunk and found the spare, but as I dug around for the jack, frustration built in my chest. I hadn't changed a tire in years, maybe even decades. That's what roadside assistance was for. But without service, I might as well have been stranded in another dimension. I looked up and down the road. Nothing. Not a single car. My only option was to walk to the nearest village, which I guessed was about an hour away, and hope I could find help there. I sighed, already dreading the trek, when I heard something, footsteps. Turning toward the sound, I spotted a figure in the distance, walking along the road. A kid. As he got closer, I could see he was young, maybe 17, dressed in worn-out sneakers and a faded hoodie. He looked exhausted, sweat glistening on his forehead, like he'd been walking for miles. He slowed as he noticed me standing by the car. Our eyes met, and for a second, I expected him to just keep going. I wouldn't have blamed him. I was just some random guy in a luxury car with a flat tire. But he stopped. Need some help. His voice was steady, though he looked like he barely had the energy to stand. I hesitated. Yeah, flat tire. You know anything about changing one? He nodded, stepping closer. Yeah, I do. And just like that, without another word, he set his backpack down, rolled up his sleeves, and got to work. I watched as the kid crouched down beside the busted tire, inspecting it like he'd done this 100 times before. He didn't hesitate, didn't second-guess himself, just went straight to work. You got a jack in the trunk? He asked, glancing up at me. Yeah. I think so. I turned and rummaged through the trunk again, this time pulling out the jack and lug wrench. I handed them over, feeling strangely useless. He took them without a word, positioning the jack under the car and cranking it with steady, practiced movements. Where'd you learn to do this? I asked, folding my arms as I watched. My uncle's a mechanic, he said, not looking up. Taught me when I was a kid. Figured it might come in handy. I nodded, impressed. I sure as hell hadn't known how to change a tire at 17. I barely knew how to pump gas back then. The kid loosened the lug nuts, his hands moving fast but sure, like he was on autopilot. He looked exhausted though. I could see it in the way his shoulders slumped, the way he exhaled deeply between movements. You okay? I asked. Yeah. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. Just a long day. Walked here from work. I frowned. Walked. How far? He shrugged. About an hour. Each way. I stared at him. You walk an hour to work? And back? Yeah. Don't got a car. Don't even got a bike. He said it casually, like it was just a normal part of life. Like it wasn't insane to be hoofing it that far every day just to make a paycheck. What do you do? Stock shelves at the grocery store in town. I glanced down at his hands, rough, calloused. A 17-year-old with hands like that? This kid had been working hard for a long time. The silence stretched between us as he pried the flat tire off and set it aside. He didn't complain, didn't ask for anything, just kept moving, focused on getting the job done. Something about that got to me. I'd met plenty of people who'd go out of their way not to help. Hell, I knew guys in my own industry who wouldn't lift a finger unless there was money in it for them. Yet here was this kid, dead tired after a long shift, stopping to help a total stranger just because he could. Name's Mark, by the way, I said after a while. Darius, he replied, tightening the lug nuts on the spare. Well, Darius. I appreciate this. He nodded, but didn't stop working. Just kept at it, like he had somewhere else to be. And I couldn't shake the feeling that this kid deserved a hell of a lot more than the life he was stuck in. Darius finished tightening the last lug nut and gave the spare a firm pat, as if double-checking his own work. Then he stood up, wiped his hands on his jeans, and took a step back. "You're good to go," he said, rolling his stiff shoulders. "Should hold up till you can get it replaced." I glanced at the tire, then back at him. That was fast. He smirked slightly, the first hint of a smile I'd seen from him. "Yeah, well, like I said, I've done this before." I reached for my wallet, pulling out a few crisp bills. "Here, take this. I appreciate the help." But Darius just shook his head. "Nah, I don't need it." That caught me off guard. "You sure?" I asked, frowning. "You just saved my ass. Least I can do is—" "I didn't do it for money," he interrupted, stuffing his hands into his hoodie pocket. "You needed help, so I helped. That's it." I stared at him. No hesitation, no ulterior motive, just pure, honest generosity. That was rare. "Let me give you a ride home then," I said. "You shouldn't have to walk after working all day." Again, he shook his head. "I'm used to it." "Yeah, but you shouldn't have to be used to it." He shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation shifting to him. He picked up his backpack and slung it over one shoulder. "It's fine. I gotta get going anyway." But I wasn't ready to let him walk away just yet. "Wait a second," I said, crossing my arms. "You mentioned you worked at the grocery store, right?" "Yeah." "And you're still in high school?" He nodded. "So what's next?" I pressed. "You got plans after graduation?" Darius hesitated, like he wasn't sure how much to tell me. Finally, he said, "College, maybe. If I can afford it." I raised an eyebrow. "You got a school in mind?" He let out a short breath, almost like a laugh. "Man, I don't even know if I can go to college. I mean, I want to. But money's tight, and my mom's already working 2 jobs just to keep us afloat. So, I dunno. Maybe community college. Maybe just work full-time." I leaned against the car, studying him. The kid had potential, I could see it. He wasn't lazy, wasn't making excuses. He just didn't have the same opportunities I'd had. And for some reason, that didn't sit right with me. "Where'd your parents go to school?" I asked, curiosity getting the better of me. "My mom didn't," he said. "But my dad went to." He stopped suddenly, eyes narrowing. "Why?" I gave a half-smile. "Just wondering." Darius sighed. "He went to Middleton Prep." My heart skipped a beat. Middleton Prep. My alma mater. That school wasn't just expensive, it was exclusive. Only the best of the best got in. And now, standing in front of me, was the son of someone who had walked those same halls. Coincidence? Maybe. But something told me this meeting wasn't just random bad luck on my part. And for the first time that day, I started thinking, maybe that flat tire hadn't been such a disaster after all. Middleton Prep. That name brought back a flood of memories. The ivy-covered buildings, the strict but brilliant teachers, the cutthroat competition among students, most of whom came from old money, just like me. If Darius's father had gone there, then at some point, our lives had almost intersected. But I didn't remember anyone by that name. "What was your dad's name?" I asked. Darius adjusted the strap on his backpack, shifting on his feet. "David Carter." David Carter. I frowned, rolling the name around in my head. It sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. "Wait," I said slowly, snapping my fingers as it finally clicked. "Tall guy. Smart as hell. Ran track." Darius's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Yeah." I let out a short laugh. I knew him. Not well, but we had some classes together. He was one of the few people who actually worked his ass off to be there. Most of us just had our parents write a check. Darius gave a small nod, but his face had shifted. There was something guarded about his expression now. "He passed away," he said after a pause. My stomach tightened. "I'm sorry." Darius nodded again, like he'd heard it 1,000 times before. It was a long time ago. I didn't push for details. The way he said it told me everything I needed to know. He didn't want to talk about it. And I wasn't about to pry. Instead, I exhaled and ran a hand through my hair. Man, that's wild. Small world. Yeah, Darius said, his voice quieter now. Guess so. A silence stretched between us. He shifted like he was ready to get moving, and for a moment, I thought about letting him go. He'd done what he came to do, fixed the tire, refused my money, and now he was heading home. But something about this whole situation wasn't sitting right with me. Maybe it was the fact that he was the kind of kid who would stop to help a complete stranger, even when he was dead on his feet. Maybe it was the way he shrugged off exhaustion like it was just part of life. Or maybe it was the fact that his father had walked the same hallways I had, but their lives had turned out very different. Whatever it was, I couldn't ignore it. I cleared my throat. Listen, Darius, you ever think about going to Middleton? He snorted, shaking his head. Man, I can't afford a place like that. I shrugged. Maybe you could, if you had the right help. Darius looked at me then, really looked at me, like he was trying to figure out what game I was playing. No offense, he said, crossing his arms, but why do you care? Fair question. And honestly, I didn't have a perfect answer. I just knew that when I looked at this kid, I saw something rare. And I wasn't about to let the world waste it. Darius watched me, suspicion flickering in his eyes. He was too smart to take anything at face value, and I respected that. I care, I said finally, because I've seen what happens when guys like you don't get the chances they deserve. He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. Guys like me. You know what I mean, I said. You bust your ass every day, working harder than half the people I know. And for what? Just to barely scrape by. That's not right. Darius looked away, kicking a loose rock on the road. Yeah, well, that's life. Doesn't have to be. He sighed, shifting his backpack higher onto his shoulder. Look, man. I appreciate the pep talk, but I gotta get going. I wasn't letting him walk away that easily. What if I paid your way through school? I said. Darius froze mid-step. Slowly, he turned back toward me, his eyebrows drawn together. What? Middleton. College. Whatever you need. I crossed my arms. You've got the drive. You've got the work ethic. All you're missing is the money, and that, I shrugged. That's the one thing I've got more of than I know what to do with. His face was unreadable. For a long moment, he just stared at me, like he was waiting for the punchline. Finally, he shook his head. Nah, that's crazy. Why? Because people don't just do that, he said. They don't walk up to some random kid and say, hey, here's a full ride to a rich kid's school. I do, I said simply. Darius exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. I could see the gears turning in his head, the battle between skepticism and hope. He wanted to believe me, but life had probably taught him that nothing ever came that easy. I don't know, man, he muttered. This feels weird. I get that, I said. And I don't expect you to just say yes on the spot. But think about it. I paused, then added, and in the meantime, at least let me get you a damn bike. You shouldn't be walking 2 hours a day just to stock shelves. He let out a dry laugh. A bike. Yeah, I said. It's not a Bentley, but it's a start. Darius stared at the ground for a second, then back at me. Finally, after what felt like forever, he sighed. A bike wouldn't be so bad. I grinned. Good. Now we're getting somewhere. Darius still looked unsure, like he was waiting for me to change my mind or say there was some kind of catch. But there wasn't. I meant every word. I pulled my phone from my pocket, half expecting to still see no signal, but to my relief, a single bar flickered to life. Good enough. Give me your number, I said, tapping the screen. Darius hesitated. For what? So I can get you that bike, I said. And so we can talk more about this school thing. He shifted on his feet, like he still wasn't sure whether to trust me. I didn't blame him. If some rich guy in a suit had rolled up to me at 17, offering to change my life, I'd have been suspicious as hell too. Finally, he rattled off his number. I typed it in, sent him a quick message, and watched as he checked his phone to make sure it went through. "There," I said. "Now I've got no excuse to forget." Darius exhaled, running a hand over his face. "Man, this is wild." I smirked. "Tell me about it." I was supposed to be in a boardroom right now, not standing on the side of the road making life-changing offers. He let out a breathy laugh. "Guess today didn't go how either of us planned." "No, but maybe that's a good thing." I stepped forward and held out my hand. "Look, I know this probably feels too good to be true, but I don't do things halfway. If I say I'm gonna help, I mean it." Darius eyed my hand for a second before finally shaking it. His grip was firm, steady. The kind of handshake you remember. "All right," he said. "I'll think about it. That's all I ask." Darius adjusted his backpack again, then nodded toward my car. "You should get going. Don't want you missing that meeting." I chuckled. Honestly, I think this conversation was more important. He gave me a look, like he wasn't sure whether or not to believe me. But then, for the first time, he smiled. Not a smirk, not a polite nod, a real smile. "See you around, Mark." And with that, he turned and started walking. I watched him for a few seconds before getting back into my car. The engine purred to life, and as I pulled back onto the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror, watching as Darius disappeared into the distance. Something told me this wasn't the last time our paths would cross. And for once, I was glad I'd gotten a flat tire. If this story resonated with you, share it with those who need to hear it. Let's start conversations that matter, and that will lead to change. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this that challenge us, inspire us, and remind us of what we are capable of when we stand up for what is right.